What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts, where I go deep each week on specific topics in the current limited format. My name is Sam Pratt. This week, we're going to be talking about Sorceress's schemes. This is an uncommon in Final Fantasy. It is 3 in a red, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, or exiled card with flashback you own to your hand, add red, and it also has flashback for 5 mana. So just to clarify on this card, just so we're all on the same page, this gets an instant or sorcery out of your graveyard, or it can also get something that you've exiled from your graveyard already with flashback. I've seen some people confuse that you can get any instant or sorcery that doesn't have flashback, but yeah, gets anything out of your graveyard or something you exiled with flashback. So this card surprised me. It looked really unimpressive in preview season. Like, you get that the joke is blue-red cares about mana value 4 for its non-creature spells. Black-red just cares about casting non-creature spells in general. But it really looked like this dirtily wheel-spinny card that's usually not very good. And then the data came out, and it's been performing really well. So it has a 58.8% game-in-hand win rate per 17 lands, which puts it as the third best red uncommon. And it's right behind Thunder Magic, which is the tiered shock variant that we have, which is a very strong card. This puts it at B- per 17 lands tier list. If you sort by top users, that jumps up to B+, which is really surprising. So normally these types of cards, this is a type of card that basically does nothing if you put it in the wrong deck. And cards like that usually have very poor win rates in the aggregate data, at least. So this clocking in at B-, when the data says something is good, it's hard to disagree that there's something there. And I think there is something there here. This card is really sweet. It's something that I never would have tried without the data or without multiple people telling me that it was good. So it's really cool that we have this sort of unique effect being as strong as it is, especially in blue-red and black-red. So often when I'm writing show notes for these episodes, I take a look at similar cards to the card I want to talk about, sort of like past iterations of this. And for cards that get instants and sorceries out of your graveyard, there's kind of two classes of cards. One is creature spells that get instants or sorceries out of your graveyard, and the other are, non-creature spells that do the same thing. There's kind of a big difference between the two. But one thing that I noticed is that for the most part, these cards are pretty good. I expected cards that return things from your graveyard to your hand to be generally pretty poor, generally pretty wheel spinny specific. But looking at a lot of the past examples, there's a lot of cards that I really like. So maybe we should have clocked this as being better than it was in preview season. So the creature spells are kind of different than the non-creature spells. The creature spells, so we're talking in Tarkir Dragonstorm, we just had Kishla Trawlers. There's a card called Shipwreck Dowser, which was in a core set a couple years ago. And these usually play the role of a value creature. So it's a body that gets you some card selection, card advantage. So usually you're picking up a key removal spell. Maybe you're rebuying a card advantage spell in a grindy matchup. So the creature spells are kind of more about rate and selection than specifically spells synergies. And on the other hand, the previous iterations similar to Sorceress's schemes that we've gotten in previous sets are more at home in very synergistic decks. So the two examples that jumped out to me were Mystic Retrieval, which is a card from Dark Ascension that was reprinted in Shadows over Innistrad Remastered. It is a 4-mana sorcery in blue that returns an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, and it has flashback for 2 in a red. So we actually have data for Shadows Remastered, and this clocked in at about B-, so about the same as Sorceress's schemes. And, like every Innistrad set, there is a spells matter theme. So I think just having the persistent way to trigger your spells payoffs is really good for those decks, and I'll go into detail on that later. And then there's also a card called Runic Repetition that's from Original Innistrad, which was 2 and a blue sorcery, return target exiled card with flashback you own to your hand. So this is kind of like the complement to Mystic Retrieval on Sorceress's schemes. And I think the joke with this card was spider spawning. Like you could cast your spider spawning out of your graveyard and get it back and get more triggers. So definitely a difference between the creatures that get back a spell and the non-creatures. I think the non-creatures, like I said, they're more about your synergy deck that wants to cast a lot of spells, doing more like degenerate things. But overall, I found a lot of examples of these cards that return instants and sorceries that are pretty good spells than I wouldn't have expected. So we might need to bump up our evaluation of these cards a little bit in preview seasons. Not that they're all good. There was one in Foundations that I found that I didn't even remember was in Foundations. That was horrible. So anyway, Sorceress' Schemes is great. I think it is pretty clearly primarily a blue-red and black-red card. And before I go in detail on what you're getting back, why it's good in those decks, where else you can play it, I want to talk about a concept called Inevitability. So I'm no savant at, high level gameplay theory. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to put this, but there's a concept called Inevitability that is very important to control decks. Basically, if the game continues as is, who is going to win? Or you can think of it from the other side of like, which player needs to take actions to change the course of the game to get it back on their side. So control decks are built with this concept of inevitability in mind, where they pack their deck full of, powerful things that can end the game and card advantage, so that the longer the game goes on, it is inevitable that the control player is going to acquire more cards in hand, be able to control every aspect of the game, and eventually win with, some haymaker, mill, something like that. I do actually want to talk about mill in control decks. This is a bit tangential to Sorceress's schemes specifically, but there's this concept of inevitability really jumped out to me with this one deck I had in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I had a card called Archive Trap, which is this 5-mana spell that mills your opponent 13 and has some other text. And there was a card called Slickshot Lockpicker in Outlaws that was this kind of Snapcaster Mage variant that could cast something out of your graveyard. And basically the combo is just like you mill your opponent 13, you untap, you cast Slickshot Lockpicker, and then you recast Archive Trap. And milling 26 cards is almost always enough to win the game. And as I was playing this deck, it was so nice to know that I had a 2-card combo in my deck that would win without the combat step. Like I knew I never needed to be like, I need to clear the board enough to where I can start attacking the opponent to kill them, because I had this combo in my deck that would just automatically win me the game as soon as I drew it. And I remember playing that deck, and even when Archive Trap was like the 4th card from the bottom of my library, just knowing that I didn't have to actually get the board state a certain way, like I could just sit there and survive because I had this inevitable end game. That was kind of a light bulb moment on the concept of inevitability. Now, that's a pretty unique case. And I'm going to talk about the difference between playing this in blue-red versus black-red, because I think black-red has this sort of inevitable endgame engine that doesn't use the combat step, and blue-red still needs to do it. But this concept of inevitability being like, I know I will win if the game goes on as it is now, and it's on the other person to change the course of the game. So, if you're a mid-range deck facing a control deck, you have to take the beatdown roll and end the game before the inevitable happens and the card advantage becomes too much out of the control deck. Another strategy that uses the concept of inevitability is actually white-red equipment in this set, or just equipment decks in general. So equipment decks are usually categorized as aggro decks, but they can grind really well. So the inevitability here is if you have a couple of good pieces of equipment lying around, suddenly if you can make a lot of tokens, you can turn each individual one of those tokens into a large monster that your opponent has to answer. So when you kind of get your opponent's life total a little bit low, you have the inevitability as the equipment player to be able to grind the game out with one creature at a time. So Sorceress's schemes, there's so many S's in that card. I feel like I'm drawing it out every time. Is card advantage and inevitability in spades. So you can kind of think of it like a draw two. Like it draws you a card and then draws you another card that draws you another card. Kind of complicated like that. But I think the important part for the majority of situations that it's being played in is that it is 4 triggers of non-creature mana value 4 spells, or if you're getting back like another flashback card or even another copy of Sorceress's schemes, that's 6 triggers or, even more if you're looping it. When you're in these spell synergy decks, these instant and sorcery non-creature synergy decks, if you're ahead or at parity with your opponent and you're in a spot where Sorceress's schemes starts triggering your things, it feels impossible to lose. And that's the inevitability it provides. Is it's very mana inefficient, but you get so much card selection, you get so much card advantage, and you get all of these synergistic triggers either from your wizards or like your Sahagins or your Shantados, that this card is a 1-card engine for these decks. And as I will mention as well very shortly, it's not even that bad if you're behind. The add red part of this card unlocks a bunch of 1-mana options for you to stabilize too while triggering these things. Like you can bring back your Thunder Magic, trigger your Sahagin, so it's a 2/4 blocker instead of a 1/3 blocker, etc. I guess right now I will transition into exactly what you are getting back, which I think the very important part of this card is that there are 3 1-mana red instants or sorceries that you can get back that are pretty notable. The most obvious is Thunder Magic, which I've mentioned before. This is the shock variant with tiered that can go to like a 4-mana deal 4. So obviously, if you're getting Thunder Magic back and casting immediately, that's 4 mana deal 2. That is not a good rate. But if it's triggering other things like Shantado, like the Emperor of Palamecia, like Sahagin, that's a pretty important play to be able to make. The other single red spells are Lightning Bolt, which is on the bonus sheet at Uncommon, and Fire Magic, which is the single red instant, and it's another tiered spell. You can deal 1 to everyone, or it's 3 mana, deal 2 to everything, or 6 mana, deal 3 to everything. So I think having 3 good options, obviously Lightning Bolt is pretty rare. That's probably the best case, but it doesn't come off very often. But 2 main set options is very good. And I think this card likely does not put up the stats that it has unless it has these options at single red mana to immediately buy back. But I think the more powerful thing to do with it also is specifically with Choco Comet, which is an uncommon red. I think it's just the straight up best uncommon in the set. It's red X, deal X damage to any target, make a Chocobo token, which is the 2/2 with landfall. So this is kind of falls into the concept of inevitability. You can Choco Comet one of their things to stabilize. You play Sorceress's schemes, get back your Choco Comet, and then at that point, maybe you have 8 mana. They're at, I don't know, some life total, and you're able to just Choco Comet their face, buy it back, the next turn Choco Comet their face again. I think if you have a copy of Choco Comet in your deck, you should probably look to pick up a copy of Sorceress's schemes. I'm not like looking to tell you like the other way around, like, oh, if you're in blue-red spells, you should prioritize Choco Comet because it's just like the best uncommon in the set. But I think it's worth noting that these 2 cards work very well together. And I think Sorceress's schemes works well just with half of the red decks in the format in general, pretty naturally, because you get all of the blue-red mana value 4 triggers and your black-red like wizard deck wants this too. So speaking pretty specifically about what you're doing with this in those 2 red decks. In blue-red, it's pretty obvious. You're triggering your mana value 4 payoffs and getting back more spells that may or may not trigger your mana value 4 spells once again. I should reiterate that Sorceress's Schemes does have flashback. So even if you're getting back like Thunder Magic twice or Lightning Bolt twice, you are getting 2 different mana value 4 triggers, which is sweet. Just to reiterate the mana value 4 payoffs, Sahagin, which if you listened last week, you know all about. Ultros, which is the 2 mana, 2/1 in blue. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, if at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, tap a creature your opponent controls and put a stun counter on it, and then has an 8 mana clause to get 8 counters. Emperor of Palamecia, which is the blue-red signpost mana dork, and Shantato, which is the other blue-red signpost. That's the 0/4 that draws a card if it was mana value 4 or greater and gets like extra power. So in blue-red, this concept of inevitability that I was talking about, it still fits here. Like, you're getting all of these triggers to buff the creatures that you're winning the game with. You do still have to win the game through combat, which is fine. Like, you shouldn't have a problem. But I consider Sorceress's schemes in blue-red to be not significantly different than a draw spell. So something like Dreams of Laguna. Obviously, I think you'll always play the first copy of Sorceress's schemes, but what I think it's giving is, you know, selection, getting back your interaction spells, which it is in black-red too, but it's just a little different that you're winning with creature combat in blue-red, so wheel spinning itself does not actually accomplish something. And I think that's the difference between this and blue-red and black-red. And I do think Sorceress's schemes is at its best in black-red by a pretty significant amount, and the data does support this. So I'm going to throw some numbers out. In blue-red, Sorceress's schemes clocks in at 59.9% game-in-hand win rate, which is 1.8% above the average blue-red deck's win rate. In black-red, on the other hand, it wins at 60.5% game-in-hand, which is plus 4.8%. So that's a huge bump to black-red. And I think that this concept of inevitability for the black-red decks is so important because the wizard tokens don't have to engage in combat, and you do actually just win the game by wheel spinning in these decks. So I had a deck that I will link in the show notes. I should mention, I'm going to link... I only was able to draft Sorceress's schemes once, but I kind of crowdfunded other decks, so I'm going to be linking other people's decks in the show notes, which is something I should probably do going forward because it's fun. I had 2 copies of Cornered by Black Mages, which is the 1 black sorcery at common. You make a 0/1 wizard and your opponent sacks a creature, which is a very good card. Really surprised me. So I was looping that card. I guess not looping. I was recurring and replaying that with Sorceress's schemes, which was getting me a new wizard each time. And then, like, at that point with schemes, each spell you cast is going to start dealing your opponent more and more damage. So like I said, at that point, you don't even need to attack your opponent to win the game. You can just cast spells, draw cards, cast more spells, draw more cards, etc., and just win the game through that, which I think is a subtle difference, but pretty important. And not that this card isn't good in blue-red, you know, it still does improve, per the data, the blue-red deck's win rate. I just think this card is pretty premium in black-red. And I had a really fantastic experience playing with it there. So overall, I don't think this is anything groundbreaking. I think it's pretty easy to see why this card is so good in these decks, in the blue-red and black-red decks specifically. I hope that the talk about, you know, the concept of inevitability, kind of looking at previous versions of this effect, was helpful. I do want to talk about some wackier decks that I've seen with this card. So these all come from someone I've been talking to named Cooper G. Fry, and he sent me a lot of decks with this card that weren't blue-red or black-red. They were mostly green decks, which seems like a very strange fit. But in all of these decks, which I, again, will link all of them, all of these decks, it's more of a card advantage spell, like a really slow, like, you really want your top end to be really good, like card advantage spell. And there's a lot of different use cases in these decks. They're really cool. I'm going to run through a couple of cool things you can do with it. Obviously, there's one deck that has like 2 Choco Comets. Very obvious why it works there. A spell I haven't mentioned in this episode is Call the Mountain Chocobo, which is 4 mana, sorcery in red. Make a 2/2 Chocobo token and get a mountain out of your deck, and has flashback for 6 mana. This is not an obvious pairing with Sorceress's schemes. Like, it is a sorcery that you can rebuy even from exile that makes a creature, which is pretty unique. but the fact that Call gets a mountain out of your deck, which gives you more mana to do even more wheel spinning, is pretty important for that card. So a lot of these green-red decks have a copy of Call or 2 copies. And in a lot of them, it really is just like this top-end card advantage spell. 2 of the zanier examples, one is like this black-green deck that is splashing Sorceress's schemes, somewhat for removal, but also for the Final Days. So the deck really doesn't have that many non-creature spells, but it's using the Final Days, which is this black spell, 4 mana, make 2 tapped 2/2s, and then it has like a spider spawning thing. Like you can flash it back for 6 and it gets you a tap 2/2 for each creature in your graveyard. And it also has 2 copies of Evil Reawakened, which is 5 mana sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And has some like top end creatures that you can rebuy too. So it's a really creative way to find a couple of other cards that would not be at their best in the traditional black-red spells deck. Like both of those cards want creatures in your graveyard, not non-creatures. But it looks like it really works there. Like rebuying your Evil Awakened, rebuying the Final Days is such a crazy endgame engine. And then the last example that he sent me was like a tried and true Red Mage's Rapier green-red tricks deck. So it was using stuff like Blitzball Shot, which is 2 mana instant +3/+3 and trample. Haste Magic, which is 2 mana instant in red +3/+1, and then you get to impulse the top card of your library. And Self-Destruct, which is like a fling variant. So Blitzball Shot is kind of like a Lava Spike in this deck, just a way to deal 3 damage to your opponent's face, 3 or more damage. So it like Schemes is a really creative way to kind of like have this inevitable burn engine. You can also do this with like a copy of Lightning Bolt in your deck and 2 Sorceress Schemes. You can, with like enough mana, you can just bolt their face an indeterminate number of times. Which it's worth noting, I haven't mentioned this, if you do have 2 copies of Sorceress' Schemes, you can loop them to get perpetual spell triggers. I don't know why you would want to do that, because if you're in a deck where you're benefiting off spells triggers, you probably have Wizards or Sahagins, and you can just attack your opponent or deal them lethal damage. But worth noting. But yeah, this green-red tricks deck looks really sweet. I'll definitely link the deck image. And I think it's just really cool that this card is a very kind of desirable synergy piece for these black-red or blue-red synergy decks. Also has these sideways, wacky ways to abuse it outside of those synergy decks, whether it's just looping your Choco Comet to win or doing some crazy like burn engine. So that's going to wrap it up. Like I said, I crowdsourced a bunch of Sorceress' Schemes decks that I will link, including my own black-red deck that I trophied with. Thanks especially to Cooper for sending me a bunch of really wacky Sorceress' Schemes decks. I do want to mention I'm going to be in Las Vegas for MagicCon this weekend. I'm signed up for the PTQ on Saturday. If you want to say hi, come say hi. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks for listening. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. I'm on Discord at samp6, and I stream occasionally, mostly Thursday nights, US time, at samp_MTG. Thanks for listening, and see you next week or this weekend in Vegas.